From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan. Remember, if you've got a tip on anything, a mystery of any kind, a theory on an open case, a really embarrassing story about that time you did that thing with those people, anything, tell us about it by sending an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear Melissa talk about your tip on the podcast. And now, here's your host, wading into another heavily forested area with nothing but a flashlight and a package of Slim Jims, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Yes. Oh, producer Mark, how you have hit on my love of the Slim Jim. I know it isn't even actually food. I'm pretty sure it's comprised of weasel buttholes, but god damn it, I do love them.
I know you do.
They're really good. They're just so goddamn good. I don't want to know. I don't want to know what's in them. They're very much like the Jack in the Box tacos, which I am also equally as convinced.
Now you're talking.
Not food. That is cat. I call them cat food tacos, as you know quite well, because I quote that to you quite often when you want them. I can just get you a can of Friskies and shove it into a taco shell and call it a day.
When we're on road trips together,
no.
I just order 10 of those things and just eat them one after the other.
No, no. I will never road trip with you again, just letting you know that. No more road trips. So today's podcast is very close to my heart. Again, celebrating women like the previous Murder-tizer about Frances Glessner Lee. This is also about a woman who's close to my heart who had no idea how she would influence history. It's also close to my heart because she was murdered not far from my home, about an hour south, actually, in Georgetown, Kentucky. And she is famous in her own right for many, many reasons. And she is known as the Tent Girl. And not because she was a big camper at all. She was a beautiful woman, sweet, kind girl. And she was found wrapped in a tarp that one would use to cover a tent. Perhaps a tent used by carnies, of which her husband was one. Anyway, since the case is still quote-unquote open, but we know what happened, I will start at the beginning. On May 17th of 1968, a well digger named Wilbur Riddle was scavenging for glass insulators that workers from the phone company were tossing along U.S. Route 25 in Georgetown, Kentucky. He saw a tarp and kicked it, and it rolled down an embankment, and it revealed a nude, decomposing body of a beautiful young woman. It was a big, heavy green canvas tarp that you would use to wrap up your tents when you're a carny and you're moving to another town. So the police at this time, 1968, God bless them, worked really hard to try to figure this out, but boy, were they off by a lot. And I get it. For 1968, they really did a stellar job. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at a book called Corpse, Nature, Forensics, and the Struggle to Pinpoint Time of Death by Jessica Sachs. And this was published in 2001. I believe it was a Christmas present from producer Mark because I've always had a little thing for dead people. So anyway, in 1968, these people, these detectives, investigators in Scott County, Kentucky, felt that this was a teenage girl that had run away from home and gone missing. She was 5'1" to 5'2", 110 to 100 to 110 pounds, beautifully manicured red nails, brown hair. Couldn't tell her eyes because her eyes were gone, but really thought she'd only been dead maybe 4 to 6 weeks. She had actually been dead about 6 months. We know that now, but so the coroner couldn't find any toxins in her body and really could only figure out that she had suffered a blow to the head and that maybe incapacitated her. And then she was wrapped up and left to die slowly of asphyxia. So they put out every kind of notification you could in 1968. I guess there weren't that many missing people. They thought they had nailed it down a few weeks later when a young girl was missing from Pennsylvania. Her description was very similar to this girl. Her mother made the 6-hour drive to Georgetown, looked at pictures. Actually, that comes into play a little later. Amazing sketch artist. And she was like, I can't tell if it's her. They finally did some testing and it was not her. She got a phone call from her daughter saying she would run off with her boyfriend and they were getting married. So it wasn't her. Carolyn Clothier, it was not her. So a Covington, Kentucky patrol officer who literally 10 minutes from where I lived, where I grew up in Independence, Kentucky, a Covington, Kentucky patrolman who was also pretty artistic, Harold Musser, was a fantastic arm of this investigation. He spent days looking at photographs of the deceased woman and developed a sketch. And I'll be damned if when you find out who it was a really good sketch. And this is May of 1968. He's just, I can't believe what they had to work with, and yet so many talented people came together. It still takes 30 years to solve this case, but it's kind of a beautiful story. So when the press gets a hold of this story, which is pretty spectacular in 1968, they quickly call her the tent girl because she's wrapped in what you would use to store a tent. So they send out all of the information they can, a big public appeal for any family members with anyone missing, any missing relatives. Even as a last-ditch effort, they call the publishers of Master Detective magazine, which I had mentioned in previous podcasts. I'm quite sure my grandmother had. I remember her having True Detective. She probably had Master Detective. Lots of creepy detective magazines around the house, which slowly weaned me away from the Archie comics. Really enjoyed the detective magazines as a youngster. So they ran a several-page article about the tent girl and asked if anyone knew anything, no matter how small, that could solve this case, to contact the Scott County Sheriff's Department. So there's actually a quote here from the Scott County attorney, Virgil Pryor, who said, "Please accept my gratitude for the assistance Master Detective magazine is lending to our investigation. You're making it possible for us to broaden the scope of our search for the tent girl's identity. It's my most sincere hope that one of your readers will recall some detail about an unidentified teenager we may have overlooked and provide a clue which will break this case wide open." And God bless them, that didn't happen. So nobody ever came forward. Couple of false leads. The sweet unknown victim was finally laid to rest in a Georgetown cemetery in 1971. And the town came together and adopted this Jane Doe. It's her headstone was donated by a local funeral home, and it's beautiful. It's like pink marble, and they actually put Harold Musser's sketch into the marble, and it is an amazing likeness, and it's got this heartbreaking epitaph. It says, "Tent girl, found May 17th of 1968 on U.S. Highway 25 North. They say died around April to May of 68, which she died December 7th of 1967, but we don't know that at the time. Age 16 to 19. She's actually like 23. Height 5'1", weight 110 to 115. They added 5 pounds because you know how men are, they're dicks. She actually, I think, weighed 110. Reddish brown hair and unidentified. So that is where she was interred, and the city took care of her. The city maintained her grave, but this isn't the end of the story. Remember Wilbur Riddle, the well driller who was looking for glass insulators and discovered her body? He retired 20 years later and moved to Livingston, Tennessee. So he now has a daughter who's 17 years old, and she meets a boy in high school named Todd Matthews, and he's her boyfriend, and she brings him to the house. So they're talking one day, and he tells what will become his future son-in-law, Todd Matthews, about finding the tent girl. And he showed him the 1969 Master Detective magazine, which really has the best information about the discovery of her body. And he becomes fascinated with especially the reproduction of Harold Musser's sketch. And Wilbur says to him, this girl's got a mother. She's got a father. She could have had a husband. We've got to find out who this girl is. So Todd Matthews, who becomes his son-in-law, was his daughter's boyfriend, becomes obsessed with this case. It occupies a lot of his time. And this is, late 80s, early 90s. He studies, yellow newspaper cuttings. He contacts authorities to find any information he can. He really wants to put a name to Tent Girl and locate her family. He notes that the FBI's lab report found a white towel draped over Tent Girl's shoulder, and he identifies that as a diaper. So it dawns on him, she may not be a teenager. She may be older, and she may be a mother. So he writes to authorities, and he explains his theories about why he thinks this, and he writes to the coroner, and he wants to have her remains exhumed and have them check her pelvic area to see if she has, been a parent. But he really didn't get anywhere. It kind of took a toll on his life. He spent a lot of time obsessing. He works in a factory. Todd Matthews works in a factory, and he, spends a lot of time working on this case. He drove 200 miles from Livingston, Tennessee to see her grave. He went to talk to the undertaker who handled her burial. He visited the local newspaper and found out there'd been no new developments, and it just really, the case obsessed him. He began sleepwalking and sleep talking. And he really tried to put it out of his mind, but he couldn't. So there's major changes taking place in the world of technology. And in 1992, he hears then Tennessee Congressman Al Gore talk about the internet, which of course we found out later he invented. So this is a tool that Todd Matthews thinks, hey, this can broaden my search. And he didn't have a computer, but he saved and saved and saved, and he bought one. He started looking at missing person websites for any kind of clue to the tent girl's identity. He hung a picture of her gravestone with her photo etched into the gravestone on his computer to keep him motivated. He spent so much time hunched over his computer that his 4-year-old son said, "Daddy is always at the pewter," which is not a type of metal, but how a 4-year-old says computer.
So this is now like 20 years after Todd has found out about this, and he's been obsessing for 20 years.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of amazing. So he created a website. Actually, it probably was only about 15 years, but it takes a while. So he developed a website devoted to the tent girl, and it brought him some emails, but nothing really advanced the search. He's been preoccupied for 10 years. So one late night in January of 98, everyone else has gone to bed, and he's just about to nod off at his computer. And he'd already viewed 400 descriptions of women that did not match the tent girl, when 3 words jumped out at him from his screen: Lexington, 1967, missing. And it was from a woman named Rosemary Westbrook, and she'd posted details of her missing sister, Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor, who was born in December of 1943. And it said, "My sister Barbara has been missing from our family since the latter part of 1967. She has brown hair, brown eyes, is around 5'2" tall, and was last seen in the Lexington, Kentucky area. If you have any information, please contact me at the address posted." And he jumped to his feet, woke up his wife and son, and said, "Oh my God, wake up, I found her." So he goes through some more machinations, but in March, just a couple of months later, of 98, he gets enough attention from authorities that he has her body exhumed, and her remains are sent to a laboratory in Frankfort, Kentucky, and a Dr. Emily Craig, who's an anthropologist with the state medical examiner's office, concluded that she was somewhere between 20 and 30 years old, not 16 to 19 as thought before. So he contacts Rosemary Westbrook, and they do a DNA test, and it turns out this is her missing sister. So to backtrack a little, she was a beautiful girl who manicured her nails, came from a large family, lived in a 2-room house, and wanted out of their house quickly. She meets Earl Taylor, who is a barker for the carnival.
Now, somehow the name Earl, that's just too good.
Well, it's his middle name. His name is George Earl Taylor, but he goes by Earl.
But he goes by Earl.
He does go by Earl.
Yeah.
And he is a real Earl on every goddamn level. So he had a 2-year-old daughter named Bonnie. And Barbara's mother was a social worker. And Earl shows up at the social work office and says, I need someone to watch my daughter while I'm trying to get people to come to my carnival, and they can sit on my face and I can guess their weight, or whatever it is that he does as a hideous carny. So Barbara's mom is like, my daughter Barbara is looking for a job. And she watches the little girl Bonnie, and they become very bonded. And in a short period of time, Earl says, you know what? My wife ran off with another guy. I'm by myself with this daughter. I could really use some help. I would like to marry you. And Barbara's like, how the fuck do I get out of this town? I'm going to marry a goddamn carny. And she does. And she loves Bonnie, and Bonnie loves her. In the meantime,
and Earl is still a carny.
And Earl's a motherfucking carny with a goddamn tent canvas bag in his backpack, just waiting to wrap Barbara in it. Oops, did I say that out loud? Anyway, case is still open. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast, is for anyone who happens to have knowledge or theory or anything about a case, open, closed, anything. I want you to feel safe enough to contact us and say, you know what, I think Earl did it, which we'll find out later. We're about 99.9% sure Earl did it because Bonnie saw him do it as an infant. But anyway, I want, it's called, just the Tip-Sters, not just because I'm a filthy-minded 12-year-old boy. I am. But I would like tips to come here. I would like someone to feel safe enough. There are, in some cases, the things we talk about, there are rewards involved. I would hope one would contact us not with a reward in mind, but, that's always out there. But please know we would love to hear any tips you have. If it could solve a case, that would be amazing. If it absolutely has nothing to do with apricot meringue, that's even better.
And that email address is?
JTTipsters, jttipsters@gmail.com. Thank you, producer Mark. I almost forgot where you can get a hold of us. So Rosemary Westbrook finds out, she was only 10 when her beautiful sister disappeared. Earl said, yeah, she ran off with another guy. Twice now. So in the meantime, she has had 2 kids with Earl, Sonny, and can't remember the little girl's name. So they have Bonnie from the original girl he killed, Sonny, and then the beautiful daughter that apparently looks just like her. So the sad thing is, not really sad, I wish he had died earlier, George Earl Taylor, Earl, died of cancer in October of 1987. And I hope it wasn't like he's diagnosed and quickly he dies. I hope he was diagnosed and he just went on and on, just slowly rotting from the inside out.
Bleeding from areas you're not supposed to bleed from, maybe.
Yes. From the tip of his cock to his tear ducts. I want it to come out of his hair follicles. I want just, yeah. Anyway. breathing.
I think we just scared a lot of people.
That's all right with me. That's okay. That is okay. So her beautiful family arrives in Lexington to see this headstone that has been there for 30 years. And after she's been exhumed for the DNA testing, they decide she should stay here. This is her home. This town of Georgetown, Kentucky took care of her. They maintained, she has the most beautiful headstone I've ever seen. It's really beautiful. They took care of her. They maintained this, her resting place. No matter how she was treated by her shitbag husband, she was treated beautifully by the town of Georgetown. She was beautiful. So in the meantime, Todd Matthews, it feels like her case has given him purpose. He developed something called the Doe Network. He's one of the co-founders of the Doe Network, which is an online database dedicated to matching missing persons with unidentified decedents. He assisted in the formation of EDAN, EDAN, which stands for Everyone Deserves a Name. It's an organization comprised of volunteer artists and sculptors who donate sketches and facial reconstructions to help with the identifications of bodies. God bless Harold Musser. God bless a patrolman from Covington, Kentucky, who was really integral in identifying Barbara 30 years later. So in a final act of dignity, a second grave marker is placed beneath that beautiful original headstone in Georgetown, and it bears Barbara's full birth name, Barbara Ann Hackman, minus her married name, Taylor, her nickname, Bobby, and an approximate date of death, which is December 7th of 1967, when poor little Bonnie heard her dad scuffling with the only woman she's known as her mom, which was Barbara, and rolled over and went back to sleep, or pretended to, because she was afraid of what Earl would do. So now we know who the tent girl is. It's Barbara Ann Hackman, and she is the tent girl no longer.
And remember, if you've got a tip on this case or any case, or if you've just got an interesting story to tell, drop us a line at jttipsters@gmail.com.